Hey everybody, it's Webkinz Fanity 1. I'm about to read to you one of the Webkinz short stories that I have completed so far. I made you another as kind of a preview to what you can expect from the Webkinz short stories collection that I will be releasing as a fundraiser to help me pay for my tuition in the upcoming month or so. This, by the way, was voted on by different KinzTubers on Instagram, so I hope you enjoy it. This is called Paragon Born, and it is a Webkinz Mass Effect story. The future soldiers of the Alliance had been training day after day for several months during what was called basic training. The day had finally come when each trainee would receive their first assignment. They had all successfully completed the course, and now would begin working as part of the Alliance military. Some were packing, preparing to leave once they were given permission. Others were taking the time to say goodbye to friends they'd made. Iceheart was using this time to relax with his girlfriend and their friends. It wasn't a surprise to anyone who knew the two when they announced that they were official. A number of their friends said that the signature Arctic fox and his signature endangered polar bear girlfriend were meant to be. In fact, they were so happy together that the thought of being placed on separate assignments never even crossed their minds. Many couples were placed together. That was proof enough for them. The Saturday that students were to receive their assignments, Iceheart and Gumdrop were sitting in the mess hall with a few of their friends. They were drinking coffee and chatting in the area. They weren't the only ones there. A number of their peers had chose the same place as their go-to spot to sit and chat. "Can you believe we're finally getting our first assignments?" grinned Jackson, a Mohawk puppy. "We can finally say we're Alliance soldiers." Taking a sip of her coffee, Gumdrop nodded in agreement. It's a dream finally come true. "Did you hear where most soldiers are being assigned?" a kangaroo named Kyle said, speaking lowly. "Apparently the Second Fleet is heavily recruiting to replace those lost at the Battle of the Citadel." Several months ago, a former Turian Spectre by the name of Saren Arcturus led Geth to the Citadel, attacking and killing many. There had been quite a bit of heavy damage, including the complete decimation of the Alliance Second Fleet. Now that the Citadel was being repaired and the memorials to those lost had been built, the Alliance was looking to rebuild what they had lost. "I'm not surprised," Iceheart commented, setting his paw on top of Gumdrop's. "They do need the numbers." Gumdrop smiled at him. "Hey, maybe that's where we will go." Jackson and Kyle exchanged looks of concern. Iceheart noticed this, and, after squeezing the polar bear's paw, he questioned them. What's wrong?" "Well," Kyle hesitated. Jackson cut in. "Aren't you too worried you'll be placed separately?" "No," Gumdrop answered without a hint of concern in her voice. "Why would we be?" "We're a couple," Iceheart added. "You know how many get placed together? We'll be fine." Jackson didn't look convinced, and Kyle just shook his head. A moment of silence passed, creating awkwardness between them. Finally Jackson spoke up. "Hey, who wants to go steal Carver's underwear again one last time?" This brought grins to their faces. Just like that, the odd tension was gone. They finished their coffee and left the mess hall towards the living quarters to pull a prank on a fellow soldier. As they were walking through the halls, Iceheart couldn't help but shake the feeling that Jackson and Kyle's concerns held some truth to them. Later that day, Iceheart and Gumdrop sat in a small waiting room. While Gumdrop was dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, Iceheart wore the camouflage pants, the blue shirt with the Alliance logo on the chest, and the pair of boots that was standard for all trainees in basic. He'd even put his dog tags he'd received when he first arrived on around his neck for good luck. Gumdrop received her assignment an hour ago. She would be heading to an Alliance research facility on Mars to help guard and protect the scientists who worked and lived there. Since she wasn't scheduled to leave until the following day, she had decided to come with Iceheart to wait with him until it was his turn. Waves of nervousness were making a village in his stomach. He tried his best to remain calm, but the worried looks that Jackson and Kyle had expressed that morning were hammering away in his head. "Hey, you okay?" Gumdrop's voice cut through his racing thoughts. A look of concern was on her white, furry face. Forcing a smile, he nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just nervous." She placed her paw on his, squeezing it gently. Hey, it's okay. If you get assigned somewhere else, we'll figure things out. We'll take shore leave together, or talk through the extranet, or... Iceheart cut her off. Don't worry, they'll put us together. Gumdrop smiled, but uncertainty shone in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but a voice interrupted. Iceheart, Admiral Hackett is ready for you. A small signature fox stood beside the door to Admiral Hackett's office with his paws behind his back and a no-nonsense look on his face. Sighing, Iceheart stood up from the chair he'd been sitting in. I guess it's time. He took a step forward, starting for the door to the office. Gumdrop stopped him, grabbing his paw and pulling him back. Slightly annoyed, he turned around. What are you... He was cut off by a kiss. The polar bear pulled him close, and he couldn't help but kiss back. It was full of passion and love, and he didn't want to let her go. But there was something else, too. There was an urging sadness, one that made his heart drop and fill him with worry. They lingered for a moment, their lips locked as tight as their embrace, before Gumdrop slowly pulled away. She wore a smile, but the same sadness that wound its way into the kiss was reflected on her expression. No matter what happens, remember that I love you. He lifted a paw to gently stroke the side of her face, looking at her like he did the first time he met her. I love you too. The small signature fox cleared his throat. Iceheart looked at his girlfriend for a second longer, then reluctantly turned away and nodded at the fox. I'm sorry, sir. No apologies necessary, soldier, he replied, a slight smile on his mouth. Just don't want to keep the Admiral waiting. Iceheart nodded briefly before continuing his way to the office. The inside was darker and quieter than the waiting room had been. He stopped a few feet from the desk that the Admiral was sitting at. Lifting his paw to his forehead, he saluted the respected man. Admiral Hackett was an Alliance legend. The Schnauzer bore scars from the battles he'd been in. His face looked worn from the years of service. Most his age would have retired by now, but the Admiral was an Alliance man until the end. At ease, soldier, the Admiral said, standing up from his desk. His expression was professional and serious, but he spoke with a gentle friendliness. Bringing his paw down and placing it on the ground so he was standing on all fours again, Iceheart nodded. Sir? Iceheart, Admiral Hackett began. Your records tell me you are excellent in combat. That's good. We need every skilled man and woman we can get. He grabbed a tablet from his desk and scrolled through the content. They also say you're a natural leader. That's not something many have. You should be proud. Nodding, Iceheart said, Thank you, sir. Iceheart, do you know what happened to the Second Fleet? He nodded again. The entire Second Fleet was killed during the Battle of the Citadel, sir. The Admiral nodded as well. Their sacrifice saved many lives, but now we need to honor them by rebuilding the Second Fleet to be as strong as ever. Frowning, Iceheart was trying to understand what the Admiral was saying. Was he going to be assigned to the Second Fleet? To be strong, the fleet is going to need leaders. Sir? Iceheart asked cautiously. Soldier, I want you to shadow the Second Fleet's commanding officer. You'll serve as a soldier, but you'll get the best leadership training the Alliance can offer. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Admiral Hackett actually wanted him to become a leader. He thought Iceheart had what it took. This was the best news he'd ever gotten. I'm honored, sir. Then a horrible thought entered his head. Sir, about Gumdrop. The Admiral looked like he had been expecting this. Soldier, I'll tell you the same thing I told her. Married soldiers are given the same assignment because the Alliance is required to do so. Private Gumdrop is not married to you, and you are not married to her. When you enlist in the Alliance, you put the good of humanity over everything else. If you want this assignment, you have to be willing to make sacrifices. Iceheart nodded. Of course, sir, I understand. Admiral Hackett nodded again. Glad to hear it, soldier. Dismissed. Bringing his paw to his forehead again, Iceheart saluted the Admiral. When the Admiral saluted back, he brought his paw down and retreated for the door. A million thoughts raced through his head. He was going to be trained to be a leader. The Alliance wanted him in command someday. But he was also going to be away from Gumdrop. One thought rang clearly, angering him. Gumdrop knew. Based on the Admiral's words, he had already spoken to Gumdrop about their separate assignments. She knew, and she hadn't even told him. When he left the office and re-entered the waiting room, he looked for the polar bear. The room looked almost empty, save for a few soldiers who sat and waited for their assignments like he had a few moments ago. "She left shortly after you went inside," the fox, who was still standing guard, explained to Iceheart. Iceheart turned around, looking at this fox, who seemed to have a look of concern. "Do you know where she went?" "She went to the left," he answered, pointing towards the exit. Nodding in thanks, Iceheart took off after her. Running through the doorway, to the left and down the hall, he tried to figure out why she hadn't waited for him. Did she figure he'd know she had already known they had separate assignments? Was she upset they wouldn't be serving together? Was she embarrassed by their public kiss before he had gone into the office? It didn't take long before he caught up with her. He spotted her just a few feet away from him. She was standing at the door to her assigned bedroom, about to enter the key code to get inside. Gumdrop! Gumdrop, wait!" She looked up in confusion, but horror soon replaced it. "Iceheart? What are you—" He stopped a few inches from her, panting. Anger radiated from him. "Why didn't you tell me you knew?" "Knew what?" She shifted from one paw to the other nervously. "Don't lie to me, Gumdrop. Admiral Hackett told me he'd already spoken to you about us being assigned separately." She sighed and turned away, facing the door. "I didn't want to tell you. I could see how nervous you looked in the waiting room." "So you lied to me?" He shook his head in disbelief. In the time they'd been together, they'd always been honest. It was almost unreal that she would actually lie to him. The two soldiers eyed them curiously as they walked down the hallway. They said nothing, but it was obvious they knew what was going on. Gumdrop narrowed her eyes at them, as though daring them to say something. She waited until they passed before asking him, "Can we talk privately?" Iceheart nodded. "Fine." Looking relieved, she turned back to her door and entered in the code. The door slid open, and the two walked inside. As the door closed again, Iceheart looked around her room. It was small and painted gray, just like all of the bedrooms given to the trainees. The only furniture inside was a dresser, a single cot, and a small desk with a chair. A suitcase sat open on the bed with a few clothes already packed inside. A picture frame sat on the middle desk. His heart dropped seeing the photo they'd taken together a week after they started going out. Gumdrop broke the silence that had fallen. "I'm sorry." She looked up at him with a pained expression. "I didn't mean to lie to you, and it was hard enough knowing we won't get to see each other very much." Iceheart remained quiet, not sure what to say. He glanced at the floor. Looking at the hurt on her face made him hurt too. I don't know where you were going to be serving. Admiral Hackett wouldn't tell me." He took this as his cue to speak. "The Second Fleet." She didn't seem surprised. "So Kyle was right." He nodded. "Yeah, they're recruiting for it. But—" He trailed off, glancing at her again. "They want me to observe with the commanding officer. They want me to be a leader someday." Her eyes widened at this. "Wow, that's quite the honor." "Yeah." He looked away again. A silence fell between them again. His stomach was working itself into a knot. He wanted so much to wrap his arms around her and pull her tight. He wanted to kiss her and tell her everything was going to be all right. But he would be no better than her if he did that. An Alliance soldier was expected to put humanity before everything else, including anything and everything personal. He was going to be trained to be a leader, taught how to run a ship, and how to draw on his natural ability to lead. If he wanted to be the best he could be, he had to let go of everything. "Gumdrop." He turned to her again. She looked at him with curiosity, her mouth still twisted in a frown. "We're going to be miles apart. Light years even. Who knows how serious our assignments really are?" "We're closer than you think with the mass relays," she reminded him. He ignored this and continued. "Our duty is to serve the Alliance, not each other." She dropped her head, but remained quiet. "Being together with you is one of the happiest moments of my life. But if I'm going to serve the Alliance—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish this sentence. "We need to be apart." Slowly lifting her head, she smiled sadly. Her eyes barely held back the tears that had formed. Iceheart could feel his heart breaking inside. He didn't want to do this. He wished he could go to Mars and serve with her, but the orders were clear. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She shook her head. "Don't be." She walked toward him, closing the space between them. "You've been the best boyfriend I've ever had. You're just doing your job." She reached up and kissed him gently. The same sadness that had been in their kiss in the waiting room was still present. After a moment, she pulled away. "I will never forget you." He lifted a paw to stroke her cheek again. "And I will always love you." She smiled the same sad smile she had just a moment ago. He held his gaze with her for a moment before pulling away. Nothing more needed to be said. They had mutually agreed to break up, although he felt responsible. He turned and walked out of the room, the door sliding closed behind him. He immediately felt sealed off from her, as though everything they had was just a distant memory. Sighing, he started for his room. He had packing to do and a ship to catch the next morning. News spread fast about Gumdrop and Iceheart. Some sympathized with them. Others shook their head and proclaimed it could have worked out if they tried hard enough. Everywhere Iceheart went the next morning, as he made his way to the front hall, he got looks from other soldiers. Some were pity, some were anger, and some were disbelief. Kyle and Jackson had gone to his room the previous night. They expressed their sorrow for him and tried to cheer him up by drinking a bottle of cerise ice brandy they had stolen from one of the instructors. Although it had made his mind fuzzy and distracted him for the night, it hadn't erased the pain he felt from breaking up with Gumdrop. The ship arrived on time, and the soldiers assigned to the Second Fleet lined up with their IDs present. 2 soldiers stood on guard, scanning each ID to double-check the assignment and identification before letting each Webkinz on board. It didn't take long for Iceheart to be passed through. The ship was a small shuttle with seats around the edges for passengers to sit. A flight attendant took his suitcase, and he took a seat next to one of his peers. He knew the flight would be long, which gave him plenty of time to socialize and get to know the other soldiers that were assigned to the Second Fleet. He found it easy to get lost in conversation. He'd always been a social Webkinz, and it felt great to be able to talk with someone, even if he didn't know them. Before he knew it, he was deep in conversations about the new human counselor, Commander Shepard, the savior of the Citadel and the first human Spectre, and jokes about other alien races. The pain from leaving Gumdrop behind slowly faded as the new reality of his first assignment started to become real. But Iceheart knew it would be a long time before he'd be able to move on.